Chapter 310 The Adjudication Shield. There were only 15 minutes remaining in the Radiant City Elite Soul Engineering Tournament's round of 6. Huo Yuao had just been sitting there with his eyes closed for almost an hour, resting up. He finally opened his eyes, and his eyes sparkled before he got down to work once again. A formless layer of spiritual detection blanketed his crafting desk, and every single sophisticated component seemed like it was numbered. He raised his right hand to draw a component from the desk's other end toward him using controlling crane capturing dragon, and pressed it down on another part to lock it in before placing them flat on the crafting desk. His right hand began to move like a butterfly meandering through flowers, and he was so fast that he left after images on his crafting desk. The multiple soul tool components of different shapes and sizes that were made from all sorts of rare metals were being continuously assembled by his right hand. A soul tool gradually took form on his crafting desk. Time continued ticking down. The other 5 contestants had already finished their work. Nobody would dare to risk the final minutes to complete their soul tools. They gave themselves enough of a buffer and reserved time during their crafting process, so all their eyes drifted over to Huo Yuao at the same time. They could see that Huo Yuao didn't have a single doll on his crafting desk at all, meaning he had no finished product. The other 5 contestants had different expressions on their faces, and even Hikaru's eyes flickered with a hint of worry. Hing Chan's blessing is a class 9 soul tool. What's he doing? With his spiritual detection to guide him, how can he not create a single soul tool after 10 hours? The hourglass had dwindled down to its final minutes, and the fine grains of sand were gradually falling away. 98 smiled condescendingly. He was entirely confident of winning even if Huo Yuao could finish crafting the soul tool he was working on. It was easy to make mistakes when working under such tense conditions. Besides, could this soul tool be operational and effective? In other words, could he really succeed in completing it? Even if he does succeed, I already have a plan to counter that. What can you do with just one soul tool? Yes, his stake was quite impressive. It looked like a defensive soul tool that's at least class 8. Very suitable for me. It's done. Huo Yuao raised his right hand vigorously, and his soul tool dropped down onto his crafting desk with a clang. His hourglass still had a teeny bit of sand. The gamblers who placed their bets on him fell back into their respective seats, as if their souls had departed their bodies. Huo Yuao had finally completed one soul tool, which meant that there was still a thread of hope. A single thread was better than nothing at all. 98 frowned from where he sat opposite Huo Yuao. He could see that Yuao had forged a very strange-looking soul tool that it was shaped like a shield. The shield's physical appearance was split into 3 different parts. There was a protruding center shaped like a sphere and as large as a human head, whose silver-white metal surface shone with gentle bluish-green light. The shield's outer surface was mostly grey metal, with this protruding hemisphere at its center, and otherwise very unassuming. Its outermost circumference was a pale blue metal, and a lot thinner compared to its other parts. One would realize upon closer inspection that this shield was crafted by assembling many different components together. There were multiple rare metals contained inside, and even an established soul engineer like 98 couldn't identify them all with one look. Time's up. Contestants, please stop everything you're doing. Judges, please step forward to assess their soul tools. Arjun was back on the stage. The soundproofing barrier dropped, and clamorous noises immediately flooded the competition stage. The 3 judges were already on stage, and the first person they approached was Huo Yuao. Huo Yuao hadn't produced a single soul tool throughout the entire round up until the last moment, and they wanted to make sure whether he was qualified to continue in this round. A few people were sitting inside a guest lounge at the center of a structure hovering in the air above the golden hall. There was a lady dressed in a long black robe seated in the middle of everyone, her baggy and oversized robe covering her entire body. One could only tell her gender from the faint lines of her physical frame. She was wearing a conical bamboo hat, and a black veil covered her face. Only her 2 peculiar bluish-gray eyes were revealed, and they were silently watching everything that was happening outside. The guest lounge was very quiet at this moment. Everybody was just watching without making a sound. What do you think about 66? Old 3? The lady sitting in the middle asked plainly. The person she was talking to was an elderly man who looked about 60 years old. His silver white hair dangled behind his head, and he had a very tough and muscular physique. He wasn't that young anymore, but his eyes were still exceedingly sharp and pithy. That youth is very sophisticated. Vice Sect Leader, I noticed that he was crafting an extremely complicated composite soul tool from the very beginning, but it's the first time that I've seen this production method. There are 17 formation arrays contained inside. The largest one is an energy-gathering formation array, and it's also the one that's located at the shield's center. He was the slowest when he was creating that formation array, but I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary about it. The other 16 formation arrays should be deflective rays and something of the like. Some are a little different from the rest, and the 6 formation arrays on the outermost circumference should be deflective rays with reversal capabilities. If my eyes didn't fail me, that also means that this shield should have absorbing capabilities. Deflection and absorption at the same time. What's he trying to achieve? The Vice Sect Leader's silver white eyes showed a little doubt and suspicion. The elderly man shook his head and said, I won't be able to guess that, either. Even though he's not considered a very high-level soul engineer, every soul engineer has his or her own innovations and creativity. This soul tool's complexity can be compared to a class 7 soul tool, and I can tell from the final assembly phase that there are many gears and other structures that I cannot understand. Most of them should be his own inventions. I have to say that this youth is a genius. I wish to take him in under our wing if it's possible. Another elderly man sitting on the Vice Sect Leader's other side smiled and remarked, even you hold this fellow in high regard? Since that's the case, I'll find someone to talk to him after the contest and ask him about his thoughts. Some of my people told me before this that they've closely inspected the soul tool that he's using for their individual wager, and that soul tool is from the illustrious Virtue Hall. Furthermore, it's likely that the Hallmaster of the Virtue Hall, Jing Chen himself, was the one who created it. It's a class 8 soul tool at the very least, but its actual strength can only be confirmed after proper assessment. The Vice Sect Leader sounded a little surprised. Can you be Jing Chen's disciple? But I've never heard of Jing Chen having a crippled disciple. Do you think this fellow can defeat your precious disciple? The first elderly man shook his head and said, it's hard to say. Between my 2 disciples, Huang Zheng is relatively level-headed and steady, and he does things more stably. He's the senior brother, and lives up to his status. However, Mo Kei is more talented, but his greatest weakness is that he is easily arrogant and condescending. He's a little better in front of me, but he's always arrogant and condescending towards outsiders. I've reminded him countless times, but he's never kicked the habit. I do wish to see him lose to 66 today, and that's not a bad thing for his future growth and development. The Vice Sect Leader said, we shall wait and see. Then, second elder, how are the Duskwater Alliance's profits looking from this tournament? The other elderly man that spoke to the first one replied, we have gained almost 33% more than our original projections. The Vice Sect Leader nodded her head and said, very well. After this, we will increase our control over the government's rare metals. You have to send some people when the time comes, as these are our Sect Score resources. Yes, the second elder acknowledged respectfully. The 3 judges swiftly made their assessments on the competition stage, and they affirmed that Huo Yuao had successfully created a soul tool. However, the judges shared the third elder and the Vice Sect Leader's confusion, and they didn't understand why Huo Yuao would craft a soul tool like that. This was a defensive soul tool in a fight, which meant that Huo Yuao would be the passive one taking hits. Did he want to defeat his component by grinding down his soul power? 98 didn't look so good when he saw that Huo Yuao's soul tool was a shield. Initially, he had believed that Huo Yuao was creating an offensive soul tool with incredible attacking strength, but it seemed like his judgment was wrong, and that meant some of his plans to counter Huo Yuao were wasted. He had spent 4 hours creating an invincible barrier against Huo Yuao specifically because of his erroneous judgment. All 6 soul engineers were quickly validated. 98 had 6 completed soul tools. Huo Yuao had only 1, and 96 also had 6. Hikaru had 5, and the remaining 2 had 4 each. 96 and 98 had a great advantage over the others in terms of the number of soul tools they had created. The chief judge took the speaker-type soul tool from Arjun. He announced the number of soul tools that each contestant had finished before he lowered his voice and said, I'll pose my routine questions now. The crafting phase is over, and because this is the round of 6, every soul tool will have to be field tested, no matter how each one has turned out. Your soul tools have to be proven in battle to show their strengths and their worth. Let me ask you now, does anyone feel that your soul tools are not enough to fight against your opponent? You have the option to back out now. Otherwise, you are responsible for your own injuries, and even your death once we enter the combat phase. There was a lot more tension on the competition stage once this was said, and the atmosphere felt a lot more antagonistic. Many officials were already on stage to remove the 6 crafting desks, and they also temporarily removed the rare metals that were intended as prizes. It was clear that this circular competition stage was where the 6 soul engineers would fight it out. Nobody backed out. The prizes were so rich and generous, who didn't want to give it a shot? Even if someone ended up on the losing end, they could still admit defeat. It was very unlikely for someone to die in a tournament that was focused on comparing soul tools. Very well. Since nobody has decided to back out, we shall commence the combat phase. May I invite 96 and 37 to start the first match? Who OUR's individual bet with 98, along with the incredible value of their stakes, meant that they would probably be the last to fight. The first match would definitely be between the more unbalanced pairs. 37 fought against 96, and was already at a complete disadvantage in his aura and disposition. There was no suspense at all, and 96 took just 5 minutes to achieve an overwhelming victory. Then it was Hikadu's turn against 85. Hikadu gradually stepped towards the competition stage with a large cannon on his shoulders. He had crafted 5 soul tools, the black heavy cannon on his shoulder, a round breastplate, a shield, a waistplate, and a helmet. Those were his 5 different soul tools, and he was well equipped in terms of both attack and defense. Almost every single contestant chose this direction. Hikadu's opponent was a little simpler in comparison. His opponent had a breastplate, and one relatively smaller soul cannon on each of his shoulders. He also had a belt-like soul tool around his waist. They were inside the Golden Halls competition stage after all, and it was a lot smaller than the Continental Elite Youth Soul Master Tournament's competition stage. Neither party had much space to move around, and any long-range attacks would reach the other side in no time. The 3 judges returned to their positions, and the chief judge exclaimed, "Begin." Both Hikadu and 85 unleashed their martial souls at almost the same time. Hikadu was very quick, and 6 soul rings rose up from his feet. On seeing this, the audience erupted into shouts and exclamations. Hikadu was a 6-ring soul emperor, and this meant that this tall and broad-shouldered man in a mask was likely to be a class 6 soul engineer as well. The people who had placed their bets on Hikadu began to gasp and exclaim in joy and delight. 85 paled in comparison. He had 2 yellow and 3 purple soul rings, only 5 soul rings, and he didn't have the most optimal soul ring combination. Both parties chose to unleash the same soul tool initially, a protective soul barrier. A layer of white light rose up and enveloped their bodies inside. Both soul barriers were class 5, as they had only had 10 hours to craft their soul tools. The belt-like soul tool that 85 had around his waist burst with colorful light, and circle after circle of intense light rippled out from it. His soul power undulations began to flourish with lightning speed. Wow. Look, everyone, the soul tool around 85's waist is an extremely rare energy-gathering soul tool. It can focus and condense the user's soul power over a short period of time. It's very difficult to create a soul tool like that, and one has to be very precise in the crafting process. Otherwise, one mistake will cause injuries to the user. I can imagine right now that 85's subsequent attack will as vigorous and violent as a thunderstorm. With his energy-gathering soul tool's amplification, his attacks can rival that of a class 6 soul engineer for a short period of time. Hikadu didn't respond as he watched his opponent's energy-gathering soul tool. He calmly raised his left arm and blocked his chest, the foot-long shield on his left arm beginning to chime faintly and radiate a layer of orangish-yellow light. Hey, look. What a great counter. The shield that 88 has chosen to use should be a soul-reflecting shield. This shield is highly resistant and effective against all soul power attacks, or more accurately, all kinds of soul rays. The only problem is that I can't tell what this soul-reflecting shield's class is. The fight begun, and Arjun's saliva was spewing all over the place as he commentated excitedly on the battle. An energy-gathering soul tool could temporarily increase a soul engineer's offensive ability, but also consumed a lot more soul power. The user would have to achieve victory as quickly as possible. 85 felt his heart sink when he saw Hikadu's 6 soul rings. He knew that he only had one chance to win. Because of this, he didn't wait for Hikadu to do anything else, and fired off the twin soul cannons on his shoulders. 2 different lights blasted toward Hikadu. The soul cannon on his left shoulder was a brilliant white soul ray. The air around it felt a little strange as this ray surged out, and everyone seemed to see cracks and tears in the air wherever this soul ray passed. The air seemed to become glassy and shatter in its wake. The other soul cannon fired a pink sphere of light. This sphere was as big as a fist, but it grew increasingly larger as it flew through the air. Every single contestant who could make it into the round of 6 had their own unique strengths, and 85 wasn't an exception. Even Huo Yuao was a little astonished as he watched those soul cannons. Both of them were class 5 soul tools that were rarely seen. The soul ray that cracked open the air as it flew was called a splitting shockwave. Even though it was similar to a shock bomb, there was a world of difference between them. Shock bombs relied on intense and forceful shockwaves and undulations, but the splitting shockwave resembled uncountable knives and blades. Powerful cutting effects would be dished out to the target, and it would cut in very irregular patterns. The splitting shockwave was highly destructive, fierce, and brutal. However, it was very difficult to craft one of these, and it was quite challenging to control it as well. Splitting shockwaves were inherently unstable and could easily injure their user. Therefore, soul engineers typically didn't opt for such a soul tool. However, 85 seemed very confident, and it was clear that he was very familiar with using similar soul tools. The pink sphere on the other side wasn't much worse, and it was known as an enfeebling cannon. This cannon could be considered a more primitive version of the aging ray which had been used on Wang Qiuer. It was difficult for any energy-based defenses to dispel or enfeebling cannon's effects, and anybody struck by it would immediately enter a weakened state. This weakened state was a prolonged and continuous one, and the victim would have to rest for a very long time to recover. Both soul tools were considered incredibly difficult to craft among class 5 soul tools. Furthermore, a lot of soul power had to be consumed when using them. It was clear that 85 was prepared with his equipment. He had a class 5 protective soul barrier to defend himself, and his energy-gathering belt boosted his soul power, while his 2 formidable soul cannons would take care of his opponent. His setup was quite impressive. The splitting shockwave was the first to reach Hikadu. It clashed with Hikadu's soul barrier, shrill and ear-piercing sounds ringing out. The audience could see cuts and scars swiftly webbing out across Hikadu's soul barrier. The splitting shockwave's most frightening characteristic was that it could be fired continuously, as long as the user had enough soul power to sustain his or her attack. This attack could be used continuously and without pause. Of course, this attacking style increased the chances of the soul tool itself breaking apart. The enfeebling cannon shell followed immediately afterwards. It was not hard to imagine that Hikadu's soul barrier would definitely not be able to withstand the splitting shockwaves if he entered a weakened state, and it was likely that that would be instantly sliced and diced into pieces. 85 immediately took the upper hand as he made his first attack, but Hikadu wasn't worried or panicky from beginning to end. He pressed his shield and its orange light, and the orange radiance seemed to materialize as it wrapped around his protective soul barrier and barricaded the splitting shockwave without. The cracks and scars immediately vanished. Hikadu's feet moved as the enfeebling cannon shell came shortly after. He took a step to the left, evading the attack with incredible speed. The fact that his large and bulky body could make such agile and nimble dodging movements was astonishing. The enfeebling cannon charge was locked onto him, however, and began to follow him as he waltzed around. The helmet on Hikadu's head lit up, a bright silver beam erupting out of it and circling once around his body. The enfeebling cannon charge was pursuing closely behind him, so it was naturally encompassed within this beam's radius, and was instantly swooped up by the silver light. Is this what's known as a class 5 capturing hand? It can capture any powerful energy-based existence, and is primarily used to counter stationary soul cannons. It's quite a surprise that 88 has created a soul tool like that. It's a very clever creation. Hikadu's capturing hand wrapped around the enfeebling charge, and its lock-on effects were immediately dispelled. Hikadu hurled the cannon charge back out towards 85, wanting to give his opponent a taste of his own medicine. The pink light sphere hurtled straight towards 85 at a speed faster than it had originally been launched at. 85 was overcome with shock, but his response was still appropriate. Hikadu's capturing hand could capture any energy-based entity at a certain speed, but it couldn't keep any lock-on capabilities. 85 dodged to one side and avoided this cannon shell, but his splitting shockwave paused for a moment because of his movements. Right at that moment, a brilliant blue pillar of light surged across the competition stage. This blue pillar boomed like a thunderbolt, and the entire golden hall seemed to tremble and shiver along with it. There was only a protective dome around the competition stage. There wasn't a soundproofing barrier. Therefore, everybody in the audience could hear the crisp and deafening boom. The heavy cannon on Hikadu's shoulder was finally unleashed. A lightning cannon. This was one of Hikadu's favorite soul tools. Frightening lightning tore the air open as it thundered towards Hikadu's opponent. The bluish-purple lighting caused the air to twist and contort, and 85 had just evaded his own enfeebling cannon charge when his face changed. Class 6. That's a class 6 lightning cannon. My protective soul barrier can't handle that. He hesitated for a single moment before he shouted, I admit defeat. He did have an option against this attack. He could use his invincible barrier to defend himself, but doing so was no different from admitting defeat. Almost every soul engineer above class 5 was equipped with an invincible barrier. But this item was so outrageously expensive that nobody would ever use it unless the circumstance was a matter of life and death. This was especially so when the tournament prohibited using soul tools that were not crafted during the tournament, and this meant using an invincible barrier was equivalent to admitting defeat. Boom. The lightning cannon was withdrawn after just one shot, but even so, 85 was immediately thrown backwards from the impact, and his Class 5 protective soul barrier instantly shattered. His soul power was almost entirely smashed away by the impact, and his entire body was burned black. He puked out a mouthful of blood when he dropped back to the ground. Arjun couldn't help but exclaim, 85 loves wealth more than he loves his life. I believe he has an invincible barrier with him, but he couldn't bear to use it. I would have done the same thing if I had been in his shoes. It's a pity I'm not a soul engineer. The battle was over, and victory had been determined. Hikaru was actually quite merciful and generous. Otherwise, if he had unleashed his lightning cannon strength to its fullest extent, 85 would have been heavily injured, or instantly killed. Thank you for showing me mercy. 85 climbed to his feet and immediately bowed respectfully to Hikaru. Even though he had lost this round, his opponent had instantly stopped attacking after he admitted defeat. He was full of goodwill towards his opponent. Hikaru remembered everything that Huo Yua had told him. He didn't make a sound, but nodded in his opponent's direction before he departed the competition stage to claim his prize. 2 matches out of 3 were over. 96 was very powerful and dominant, and Hikaru's last Class 6 soul tool was equally strong and impressive. Both of them gave the audience a deep and lasting impression. Soul engineers typically resolved their combats very quickly, and rifts in strength and standards were quickly presented in a fight. The highlight of the show was about to begin, and the contestants that had bet against one another were about to fight. Everyone in the audience began to take shorter and quicker breaths. Some were pleased and others upset about the result of the previous 2 matches, but the third and final match had the best odds. This was especially true for those who had placed their bets on Huo Yua. Every single one of them could feel butterflies in their stomach. Even though they knew their chances of winning their bets were slim, they still had to hold on to that thread of hope until the very end. The odds were 1 to 3. These was considered very good odds, and they would make windfall profits if they won this bet. Those who had placed their bets on 98 weren't worried at all. 6 soul tools versus 1. Unless his opponent had a trump card that ensured his victory, 98's advantage was just too evident. There was nothing they had to be worried about at all. Huo Yua smiled, but his smile felt a little chilly. Officials pushed his wheelchair onto the competition stage, and 98 stepped onto the stage on the other side, fully equipped with his 6 soul tools. Their gazes met, and the corner of 98's mouth curled into a smile. Do you feel the pressure now, little fellow? Give it up. I won't kill you, considering you've given me such a nice present. I'll let you keep your life because of that. Huo Yua's face was black. We haven't even fought yet. How are you so sure that you'll win? Let me tell you. I have a lot of soul power. Humph. 98 laughed heartily and said, that means you want to use that shield of yours to grind me down until I have no soul power left? Do you think that's realistic? I have at least 100 ways of breaking through your defenses. You're so outrageous and arrogant even though you're sitting on that wheelchair. Now I understand why you were crippled. Huo Yua felt a not form in his heart. Even though he was intentionally showing weakness to his opponent, he still didn't feel very happy when his opponent labeled him as an outrageous and arrogant cripple. We'll see during the match. I hope you won't cry after losing the battle. The Darkness Green Dragon, huh? It's already mine. Huo Yua grunted coldly, but he didn't seem like he had any substance to back up his words. My Darkness Green Dragon is right here. I'm afraid you can only look at it. Ha ha ha. 98 waved his right hand, and a dark green light waltzed around his fingertips like a spiritual serpent that had come alive. Huo Yua had to admit that 98 was quite accomplished with soul tools, and he had his own attainments. Judge. Huo Yua suddenly shouted. All 3 judges turned towards him confusedly. Huo Yua said, I've already given my stake to you before this. The crafting phase is over, so shouldn't 98 give his stake to you just like I have? That's only fair. 98 felt his face freeze for a moment, but he quickly returned to normal. He generously revealed the Darkness Green Dragon in his hands and said, take it away. Then, it will come back to me in a moment's time. Anyway, Huo Yua could clearly tell that 98 couldn't bear part with his carving knife when the judges took it away. All soul engineers at every class were as intimate with the carving knife they always used as if it were their own child. It was natural that any soul engineer would feel a little out of place without their favorite carving knife in their possession. They entered the competition stage and took their sides. They had the soul tools that they had crafted earlier on them. Huo Yua placed his shield flat down on his legs and gently caressed its surface. The unsettled expression on his face gradually disappeared, and he finally displayed a self-confident smile. He was absolutely certain that this shield was one of the most successful soul tools that he had crafted over his entire life, and had named it the Adjudication Shield. Are you guys ready? The judges inquired from their elevated seats. I'm ready. Both Huo Yua and 98 responded at the same time. All right. Bring up the protective barriers. The pale yellow protective barriers rose up and formed a hemisphere that encompassed the entire competition stage. The barriers were there to prevent the soul tools unleashed from damaging the Golden Hall. Huo Yua raised the shield in his hands. 98 seemed as casual as ever on the other side, and he raised a strange-looking soul cannon with his right hand. Begin. The round of 6's final match began with the judge's announcement. Huo Yua raised his shield in front of him. However, not a single soul ring could be seen on his body. On the other side, whistling sounds could be heard beneath 98's feet as 2 yellow, 2 purple, and 2 black soul rings rose up, one after another. Dense soul power undulations immediately rippled from his body. He wasn't at all hasty to attack. Instead, he took a few steps forward as he placed his soul cannon on his shoulder. Of the other 6 soul tools that he had created, other than his invincible barrier, he took the longest to craft this one. This soul cannon looked like it was embedded into his shoulder, and it gave the audience the feeling that it was part of his body. This was a quality that an outstanding soul engineer had to possess, and every soul tool he created had to have chemistry with the soul engineer's body. This soul cannon was silver white in color and faintly radiated green light. The cannon's mouth was flat and rectangular, and the entire cannon seemed a little peculiar. The black, flat opening began to flicker with light. 98 channeled his soul power, and a soul tool on his waist behind his back erupted with light. He also had an energy gathering soul tool, but his energy gathering soul tool was a little gentler than the one that belonged to 85. At least, the soul power undulations didn't seem as strong. However, once this soul tool was activated, the soul cannon on his shoulder erupted with green light. There appeared to be black streaks of air circulating around the cannon's mouth. Huo Yua hid his body completely behind his shield. Blue light sparkled on his shield, and a faint blue of light could be seen that increased the shield's defensive area of effect. The hemispherical protrusion in the shield's center didn't change much, while the silver white regions at the shield's center and on its edges shone with relatively more intense white light. The shield had quite an impressive outward appearance to the naked eye. However, the gamblers who had placed their bets on Huo Yua felt their hopes dwindling to nothing. Could he really grind down his opponent's soul power with this shield? They witnessed Huo Yua's soul rings at this moment. He had 2 yellow, 2 purple, and 1 black soul ring. This was the optimal soul ring combination, but he only had 5. He was a soul king, so how he could win a war of attrition against a soul emperor? A soul emperor's soul power was at least 2 or 3 times more plentiful than a soul king's. Huo Yua rarely revealed his soul rings' true colors to outsiders so that he could hide his identity. He was using imitation to mask their actual colors. 98 soul cannon fired, and a dark red beam stretched through the air, sweeping towards Huo Yua. Inside the central guest lounge, the third elder muttered under his breath, I want to see how this fellow is going to defend himself against Mokei's corrosive decomposition cannon. With the Darkness Green Dragon's amplifications, this corrosive decomposition cannon would be considered very powerful even among class 6 soul tools. It's very explosive, but its continuous destructiveness is its strongest attribute. No matter what deflective and absorptive effects its shield possesses, it can only take effect on material entities. How is he going to defend himself? Huo Yua proved how he could defend himself on the competition stage. He placed his shield in front of him and began to chant something under his breath. The shield blocked everyone's vision, and his eyes suddenly turned grey. The audience watched as the corrosive decomposition beam was about to reach his shield. A grey streak suddenly burst from Huo Yua's body and condensed into a sphere of smoky fog that blocked the beam's forward movement. Just like that, a series of crackling sounds could be heard as steam rose up from the competition stage. Huo Yua didn't move at all, but a black skeleton suddenly appeared before him. This skeleton seemed to have been called from nowhere, and the grey fog blocked a light beam for one moment before this black skeleton forcefully intervened. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.